Right, good evening and welcome to the East Devon District Council's Scrutiny Committee meeting. Thank you, officers. On the 12th of January 2026. I'm your chair for this evening, Councillor Mike Goodman. This meeting is being recorded and is live on the county YouTube channel. There's no fire alarm drills anticipated today. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, please leave the building through the nearest fire exit and by following the green running man signs above the doors and make your way to the rear of the car park. If anyone needs assistance leaving the building, in the event of an emergency evacuation, please let us know. The organiser of the meeting will tell you when it is safe to return. Please make sure your phones are either muted or switched off. All councillors have been sent the agenda for today's meeting, and any members of the public who want to view the agenda can do so by visiting the website www.eastdevon.gov.uk. We will now start the meeting with a roll call of committee members present, which will include declarations of interest. When you hear your name, please unmute your microphone and confirm you are present, and please state whether you have any declaration of interest in terms of the agenda. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Blakey.
Present and no declarations.
Thank you. Oh.
Present and no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Fernley.
Present and no declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Goodman.
Present and no declarations of interests.
Thank you. Councillor Levine.
I'm here. It gave me the green light. That's why I shouted.
Thank you. And Councillor McKinder.
Present, no declarations.
Are there any councillors outside the meeting who want to declare any interests? Two councillors, no? Okay. Right, if we go on to the minutes, which is on page 3 to 5, does any councillor have any comments on the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 2nd of October 2025? No, thank you, and the minutes are agreed and I will sign them later. Agenda item 2, apologies. We've got any more than on here? Do you want me to call them out? Or right, councillors Ian Barlow, Jenny Brown, Alistair Bruce, Bethany Collins, Ollie Davey, Anne Hall, Matt Hall, Vicky Collins and Joe Wibley. Are there any others that anybody know, or does that complete?
No, there aren't.
Fine, thank you. Agenda item 3, well, we've done the declarations of interests. Agenda item 4, public speaking. There's nobody down to speak. Matters of urgency, none that we're aware of. Confidential items, there are none. And so moving on to item 7, decisions made by Cabinet, including the portfolio, called in by members for scrutiny in accordance with the overview and scrutiny procedure rules. There's one item to consider which will be dealt with under item 8, which item 8, before considering this matter, I think it would be helpful to set out the 3 options available to this committee, and we've got 3. Agree to take no further action, in which case a Cabinet decision will stand. Refer the matter back to Cabinet for reconsideration, setting out the reasons for the committee's concerns. Or 3, refer the matter to the full council. If the council does not object to the decision will stand. If the council does object to the decision, it cannot be overruled. If the decision is in accordance with the policy framework budget, but can refer the decision back to Cabinet to consider the council's views and make a final decision. Now, what I'm prepared to do is to hear from Paul Osborne, first of all, the officer who's put the paper together, which you all have had, and you've had the presentation as well before. And I think, Paul, if you want to introduce it, so we'll start with you, if we may.
Thank you, Chair. If it's acceptable, what I was supposed to do is not kind of revisit the background and the legal requirements to provide saying, etc., but just to get to the crux of the calling request, which is around the value of the investment and the different options that we've discussed, if that's okay. So, as a brief summary, obviously, I think everyone here, perhaps other than Councillor Fernley, was present at the Q&A session last week. But the annual costs for the maintenance of Clis Meadows are estimated at £25,000 a year. And then the average annual capital replacement costs, which go up and down throughout the lifespan of the site, is £15,000 a year. That's average, without allowing for inflation. The total cost, therefore, again without inflation, is 3.3 million over 80 years. If we take an average rate of inflation of 3%, that cost would increase to 13 million, roughly. Funding the maintenance of the site on £40,000 per annum is an acceptable approach, we would suggest, in the short term, but with the inflation costs, that will rapidly increase. So in 10 years, the annual cost would have gone up from 25,000 to 33,000 and up to 45,000 after 20 years. And then the capital replacement works would be increasing at a similar rate. And it may be then at a future date, there'll be insufficient SIL on an annual basis or a requirement to seek additional funding if there were some significant capital works on site. There isn't necessarily a guarantee that there'll be enough SIL available in the future date to do that, so then in that case, they would have to look for funding from other council budgets. So therefore, we recommending the investment approach which has been set out. Work was undertaken by officers supported by Global City Futures and an independent financial advisor to estimate what that required investment would be. And the idea is that this would generate sufficient returns to fund the full cost of the management, including inflation for 80 years. Obviously, as we discussed at the Q&A session, there are risks to any investment, but we have looked carefully at the options and the model of the return, likely return based on previous performance of the Local Authority Property Fund from the CCLA, which is the best recommendation, against potential inflation growth. This has then generated the £1 million we've recommended, and then, as we discussed again, we suggest there's also a further £100,000 put into a ring-fenced account to cover poor performance in that return, particularly on the shorter term. The investment package that we are recommending, as I mentioned, is the CCLA Local Authority Property Fund. This has got a really good track record. It's based on the UK property market, so it's a fairly cautious investment approach. It doesn't fluctuate as much as some of the other global investments, and it's used by 245 authorities nationally. It's only used by local authorities, and the investments, individual investments they've made range from only 25,000 up to £60 million, and the total value of the fund is about £1 billion. So it's a substantial fund that we would be investing into. That covers the key points, I guess, in terms of coming to the nub of the matter, which is around the value. The 1.1 million we're proposing to invest at year one has been carefully modelled to look at how that would return and meet the £13 million investment maintenance costs over the lifespan of the project. So in the broader sense, whilst that's a substantial amount of money to put forward at day one, in terms of the council's commitment and the risks associated with the cost of managing this site for 80 years, it's obviously a significant saving on the total cost, which could be up to about £13 million. I think the other 2 points that I relate to, one is that we will have other infrastructure projects. There's a lot of demand for delivering infrastructure support development, but that will include further SANG delivery coming forward. So we're just working on our strategic SANG delivery strategy, which will cover 2026 to 2040. This will be funded across the 3 authorities, East Devon, Exeter and Teignbridge, to support the delivery of the 29,000 homes that are allocated in the new local plans. The likely amount of funding is still being finalised. We're working this out. We'll be bringing a report to Overview and Strategic Plan Committee in the spring. But the likely annual funding requirements are about £400,000 per annum for the first 5 years, and that would be funded through SIL primarily. So there will be other draws on SIL as well as this if we were to delay investing at this stage. I have asked our planning contributions officers about the budget that's left in the SIL pot. In the last funding round, £10 million were committed to infrastructure projects, which include the site works for Clis Meadows. Some of that has already been spent, Some of the other projects are progressing more slowly and have not yet drawn down the funding, but it's allocated to those. That leaves a balance of £2.1 million of unallocated seal funding, of which obviously the £1.1 million for Clis Meadows would reduce that down to £1 million at this point, but that doesn't allow for further income that will be coming in to our coffers in forthcoming years. I think, Chair, if that's okay, that's my brief summary. As we set out in the 3rd of December Cabinet report, our officer's recommendation is that the in perpetuity management funded to investment is the best value approach and the lowest risk to the authority. Thank you.
I'm not going to answer your question at the moment. I just wanted to add a few things first, and I'm going to open to anybody outside the Cabinet and coming inside the Cabinet. Just to clarify that, for those who don't know, is that originally the Cabinet agreed 2 million, and this went back to the SIL board to look at, and the SIL board rejected it. Then what happened is that they re-looked at the way they could finance it, and they could decide they could do it for 1,100,000, which you might ask why why couldn't they have done that in the first place? However, that's what then came back to Cabinet, and then at the Cabinet meeting in December, where there were 8 members present, 2 voted for, 2 against, and 4 abstained. So you can get from that, there's some real uncertainty on what's the right course of action, and I fully understand the concern that everybody's got, both in Cabinet and outside. And that was, we called it in for us to debate it today, but I wanted to give you that bit of background in case you hadn't seen, read all those reports. So can I go outside the Cabinet? Well, we've only got 2 Cabinet members, but there may be officers who would like to say something, or they may want to hold their powder until we're asked any questions, entirely up to them. So Jeff and Roy, is there anything you want to ask now?
Thank you, Chair. What happens like in 100 years or 120 years? How's it going to be funded then? Thank you.
Well, I think that we can only do with what's in front of us now. Perpetuity is 80 years, and I don't think many of us will be around in 80 years' time, but after saying that, it is burden on this council to set things up that into perpetuity we can fund it, and that I think is a point that is being made. Jeff, I really want in that, and I'm glad your colleague is coming, because what I would like to do now is, because you may or may not realise that the 2 Cabinet members have different views on this, which is very interesting and absolutely right, because it is not an exact science on what to do with this. So what I would like to do is to invite Jeff and then Olive to put their views on how they would do this and why. So Jeff, can I ask you first?
Yep. We have to provide servicing for this site for 80 years. We have to guarantee that to Natural England. If they feel that's not right, we could lose the power of building any houses within 10k of the Pebblebed Heath and estuary. We owe that to also Exeter City Council, which includes all that area, and half of Timbridge Council. So we need to make sure it is the right way of doing it, and follow the procedures that Natural England tell us how we should do it. As I say, this is the normal way of doing it for running a SANGS. The only other council in Devon that has got SANGS, which is Timbridge, have a similar model, although a more expensive way of doing it, but we're doing it this way. And yes, we looked at Timbridge, and that's where we got the earlier funding costs from. And when we looked at it again and looked into finer detail, yeah, we could see we can make savings. Now we're going into a unitary council. It's even more reason that we need to do this investment model. Because we can't guarantee that we're going to, have the funding there for the next 80 years. What happens if no properties are built in this area for a year? There's no sill. What happens to, in 30, 40 years' time? Is there going to be a different way of funding and sill disappears? So this is the surest way of guaranteeing that this area is going to be managed successfully and well for the next 80 years.
Thank you. Todd, before you speak, because you weren't here at the start, have you got any interests that you would like to declare?
My dentist sends their apologies for my tardiness, Chair. While I am very interested in the subject this evening, I don't have any declarations to make.
Thank you. Now over to you to give your view on what you would do, which we all heard at Cabinet, but some people may not have heard it. And I wanted to give you and Jeff the opportunity before we let it open to speak. So over to you.
Of course, thank you, Chair. The traditional pre-scrutiny Cabinet face-off. It's an uncomfortable and an unusual position for me to be in, disagreeing not only with officers but also with colleagues on Cabinet. Normally, we manage to come to see eye to eye on most things, and frankly, I'm normally too scared of Andy to disagree with him. However, on this occasion, my title, Chair, is among other things portfolio holder for infrastructure, and I think if members take one thing away from the sort of slightly rambling sprawl that I'll go on shortly and succinctly, it's that I think we could spend £1.1 million on more important items of infrastructure within this district without compromising our legal duty to provide this SANGS. I think the alternatives that have been set out in the report to fund that SANGS by an annual drawdown from SIL, still developers' money, still coming from the same place, still not coming out of the council's core funding, is fundamentally a better way of doing things. It's the way that we pay for an awful lot of things that we need to do under the habitat regulations. I believe, I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but we take a bottom slice, if you like, out. It's 7 or 8% off the top of my head of all of the SIL receipts that we receive as an authority, which go towards funding various things to do with habitat mitigations at the ex-estuary and the Pebblebed Heaths. We're legally obliged to do those in exactly the same way as we are SANGS, and you know, with respect to Jeff, you know, I know his heart's in the right place. I really don't see at all the argument that we aren't legally securing this SANGS by choosing simply to fund it every year from SIL, rather than putting an endowment in place. We fund, as I said at the Spotlight session last week on Monday, we fund an awful lot of services as this authority that we are required by law to provide by deciding on an annual budget every year, where, you know, frankly, and we've seen it this year, there's no certainty that we'll necessarily have the money to do the same thing again next year. So I think the point I'm trying to make there is there is no argument that one solution is better than another in terms of complying with our statutory obligations. Both will deliver the SANGS, both will keep it maintained. Yes, there are differences in terms of how much it might cost in total in the long term. Yes, there are differences in the impacts from inflation and from changing cost pressures. And yes, I'll accept that, you know, give it 40 years, SIL might not be around. I mean, frankly, give it 3 weeks the way the planning system is at the moment, and SIL might not be around. But I think fundamentally, you know, SIL working group asked officers to come up with more options than just a £2 million endowment as it was then, that would legally satisfy the requirement to provide SANGS. This was one of them. Members will be well aware of the really significant infrastructure pressures that we have throughout the district. Mr. Freeman will perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the last time he said it to me, there was a £70 million shortfall on priority one projects alone, and that's just the ones that are in our infrastructure delivery plan, not the projects that never made it into the infrastructure delivery plan as well. I think fundamentally my argument comes down to, I think that £1.1 million would be better spent filling that budget gap on some of the projects that we have that are pressing today, here and now, rather than putting it away in a pot to deliver a SANGS over the next 80 years. Fundamentally, that's what my view comes down to. It's a value judgment, I'll accept that. But that's my view. Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Scrutiny for looking at this as well.
Chris, I see you've just got here. First of all, can I ask you, have you got any interests to declare?
No interest to declare, thank you, Chair.
And because I haven't come into Cabinet, and I would like people from outside Cabinet, and I'll put you on the spot, but I know you and I have spoken about this meeting. Are there things you would like to put at this particular time?
Thank you, Chair. So, with apologies for lateness, car trouble and all the rest of it, and apologies if I'm going to go over ground that you've already covered so far. I struggle with this. It appears to be somewhat unprecedented, and correct me if I'm wrong, this may be the way that it has been done in the past, to set up an endowment type fund for meeting very long-term commitments. However, I would put it to you that this council has an enormous number of very long-term commitments. If you think about the the housing fund, etc., there are enormous amounts of long-term commitments that we have just in the housing side, let alone the rest of the council's commitments to all sorts of environmental commitments, leisure, parks, etc. There are arguments that could support setting up an endowment fund for any one of those long-term commitments. I would struggle as to why this one is being picked out specifically. Secondly, the cost of this particular fund appears to be prohibitive to me. 6.75% of the fund is spent up front as a golden hello, if you like, to join a commercial, what I understand to be a commercial property investment portfolio. Commercial property investment is, by its very nature, incredibly risky. Are you joining it at the right time? It's cyclical. At the moment, office investment is at a low, and industrial investment is at a premium. Where are we joining in this investment cycle? Have we had advice to this? Why are we picking this particular fund when there are a myriad of other endowment funds, not necessarily with local authority in front of their name, which would be far cheaper, just as risky, potentially, but actually you need some risk in order to attain a level of investment that you're trying to attain from a level of return from this particular fund. 6.75% is not easy to achieve over 80 years. It's not guaranteed, it's not warranted. What are you paying £67,500 for? So those are my kind of challenges. I'm not professing to be a financial advisor, but I have spoken to one about an investment of this level, at this sort of scale, an investment fee of circa 2% as an initial investment may be justified, with ongoing investments in the region of 0.2 to 0.4%, depending on what you are invested in. Those sorts of figures and fees would seem to be far more in the right ballpark, in my personal view. That's kind of where I'm at, really, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Simon, would you like to take that one because it's financial? Because I did some research when it was raised to me, and it's quite clear that's what they quote on the website, and they give an explanation of why, because to spread it, etc. But I think that it does need you, if you would be so kind, to give your view on that.
Yes, I suppose there's two aspects to comments made. One in terms of a number of services that the authority has to provide, statutory going forwards, and why is this different? I suppose this one's different in that the funds are coming from a specific place, and those funds are available to meet that expenditure. So you're setting aside, whether you do that now or do it in the future, that's your choice. But it's not the overall general budget of the council. There are specific funds to allocate, so it's just when you allocate them. CCLA is known in the local authority world. It's something that our treasury management strategy is comfortable with. We could look at other areas, but it has got a good track record. It has got the size we would need to invest in and the grade of investments. It is used by a number of local authorities, and our advisors would promote CCLA over us trying to go out and do our own searches, trying to find our own investment funds. I suppose you said this is the model that we're looking at for this particular investment and this particular scenario, but it's being used by other local authorities for the same purpose. So although it's new ground perhaps for us, and I think we're trying to form a strategy here about how we deal with future ones as well, so I think this decision is important for the council. In terms of the model, that's already out there being used. So I wouldn't like to take this committee into an in-depth conversation about what's the right or wrong of a particular investment fund, what returns are, how much percentage upfront compared to annual. We can look at that if there are concerns around that in our treasury management strategy using our treasury advisors, but I don't think you're going to solve that tonight amongst a conversation of members saying, I've sought my own independent advice and got a view. I think that's really difficult for the committee to determine and to understand. So if that's a concern, we can look at that and make sure it is the right model. But I think the actual decision is around that element of, do you want to secure that money now? The funds are sat there in order to put that into for perpetuity. There are risks, whether that will meet the total commitments, but we've done the best we can in terms of setting out the expenditure, the cash flows, and anticipating what will come in to cover it. Or the alternative is you can just meet it annually. But there is those risks associated with that as well.
Yeah, I think I should have said at the beginning, because I did get one or two emails. This committee isn't today to decide whether you should or shouldn't do this. We've got to do it. It's the way it's funded is the key for this meeting, not whether we should or shouldn't do it. We've got to and will do it. But just in case people are watching and thinking, well, they want to stop, because several people emailed me to say, why are you stopping it? And I did explain that's not what we were doing. So, thank you. Do we want to now come into the committee? And I'm aware we've only got 5 of us. But do we start? Who would like to go on, Lee?
Thank you, Chair. To be honest with you, I'm floundering. And the difficulty for me is that the argument for and against are fraught with imponderables. And I'm really struggling with the task of putting all my ducks in a row. But it seems to me that the number of the discussion is whether this particular project takes priority over other projects, known and unknown, for sealed funding. Now, the argument in favor of this proposition that we carry on is that under the current planning rules, EDDC has a duty of care in perpetuity. And weakening that duty by withholding long-term commitment may cause natural England to embargo house building anywhere near the Pebble Heath beds. But the likelihood of this happening is unfortunately unquantifiable. especially as planning regulations are constantly under review. And moreover, it is impossible for us to guess whether the new unitary will accept the duty of care and provide the necessary funding to keep this project going. So I'm left with a quandary of how to fund the project and for how long. The lifetime of EDDC, the period of the emerging local plan, perpetuity. Officers have provided us with a financial model for the latter option. Now, the model produced by the financial advisors tells us that an investment of £1.1 million will take care of the funding in perpetuity. But the outcome of the model is only as good as the assumptions it is built on. Will the assumptions be borne out in practice? Will inflation stay 3% for the next 80 years? Well, it seems to seem that economists struggle to predict inflation on an annual basis, and that the inflationary pressures that drove the cost of living crisis were triggered by unexpected global events. I rather suspect that the answer is only a maybe. I can't help thinking of a cartoon that I saw many years ago in The Economist, in which a lady at a crowded party points out a gentleman to her friend and says, "He is a great economist. He was right in 2 cases out of 100. I'm not sure that the investment will last as long as officers expect, but supposing that it only covers the period, the next 25 years, the period of the emerging local plan, we're only looking at roughly at an annual cost of 40k, which is what the other options suggest. 40k a year is not an exaggerated, it's not terribly extravagant. But I also want to consider something that Simon said during the spotlight session that caught my attention. His remark was that in terms of accountancy, there is every reason for us to plumb for the investment option once we have the money to realize it. And that comment carries some weight with me. So I now have 2 endings to my do we or don't we?
Thank you.
I think I will use, I've got a conclusion. I'm going to take one consideration with another, if I can quote Gilbert and Sullivan, and go with my gut feeling. And my gut feeling says that we should accept officers' recommendation.
Okay.
Because I think that it will probably cover the needed expenditure in the next 25 years at an acceptable cost, and we keep natural England huffing and puffing at a safe distance. Thank you.
Thank you. Paula.
Thank you. Like Yehudi, I'm having a bit of trouble with my ducks as well, because being a ward member for this area, I know what other money this money could be spent on, what infrastructure. I know what's in trouble, I know what's got a shortfall. So it's incredibly difficult to balance these 2 arguments. Yes, it would be great to say, oh, let's not spend it on the SANG, and then there's a bigger pot that the school I want to get built might get a bit more of that. But listening to Yehudi and the arguments for and against, my gut feeling is that we should go with officer's recommendation, because then the deal is done, it's dusted, we've made a decision, and we don't have to keep revisiting that decision. We don't have to worry about what's going to happen with Unitary. If there are big world events, it's not going to be just the fund that suffers. House building will suffer. So then the SIL receipts might go down. So then we're back to square one of not being able to fund the park. So I think that's the direction I'm travelling in.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Kevin.
Spoiler, I might be taking the opposite view on this. Let me start by reading the first definition of perpetuity. This is something I've banged on about previously. The state of or quality of lasting forever. I know that legally that it can be a limited number of years, but to my mind, perpetuity has always been forever, not just simply having it hang around long enough so that we can pass the problem on to the great-grandchildren. So that said, I have concerns about the notion of the managed funds over the kind of period that we're talking about. If we look back 80 years, so we're talking 1946, I think one thing that somebody in 1946 would have said is got no idea what's coming down the road. The things that have happened would have been entirely unpredictable. And there have been enormous swings in finance markets, as well as the if you like, the politics of the world as a whole. And I think actually that seems to be accelerating. People that you thought were friends now turn out to be enemies, and so on and so forth. The uncertainty seems to be increasing. And for that reason, I have severe doubts as to whether we can rely on a nice, steady, regular investment performance that's going to cover the cost of this over an 80-year period. Therefore, for me, because I don't think that, and perhaps Jeff Young can correct me if I'm wrong on this, I don't believe that Natural England require us to take the endowment approach, that we can actually fund this on an annual basis. So I think for me, it's actually less uncertain if we decide to use that money, that 1.1 million for other infrastructure projects now, which are needed now. It's not like we haven't got a long list of things that need to be done. So I think if we were to use that money now for projects that are going to bring in benefits now and for the future, that for me is preferable to taking a very long-term risk on a significant chunk of money. I therefore find that I really think we should refer this one back to Cabinet in accordance, and I'm in accordance entirely with what Councillor Todd Olive said earlier as well. For me, I think that the endowment route has the potential of being a very big mistake. Thank you.
Duncan, did you?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to take a step, maybe slightly sideways, look at what we're doing here. So we are not necessarily, we cannot take councils or cabinet's decisions for them. All we're being asked to do, as Councillor Blakey said, is either accept the decision of cabinet or send it back to them to think again, and they may come up with the same answer.
Or send it to council.
Or send it to council. Yeah. Oh, that's not amongst the recommendation, but yeah, it's well, I know you read it out, but it wasn't in the paper.
No, but we could make that recommendation.
We could.
Is what I'm saying. Yeah,
we could. I was going to take a step back at the first point of those recommendations, where this came up because the cabinet debate was split, and I don't find that a very strong argument. I mean, that's the nature of democracy. We have rules for whether committees are core-rate or not, and that whatever if we are only just core-rate, if we make a decision, that is our decision. Whether we can't say, oh no, actually it wasn't a good one in scrutiny because we should have had the whole committee here for something as important as this. So I don't find that argument very convincing. The second point was there were concerns that spending of this money does not represent good value for East Devon District Council. Well, that same cabinet meeting, the point before was the previous SANGs, where it's a smaller sum of money, but it's the same ratio of investment and the additional income fund. For a smaller site, actually, if I got my sums right, and maybe the officers can correct me if I'm wrong, this one looks like it costs about 50% less per hectare of SANG area than the Percy Wakely Wood one. And we haven't been asked to re-examine that one. And so I find that, yeah, sure, we can all have arguments of whether it's good or bad value, and there are views expressed around the room, and it's like, I'm a beekeeper. If you ask 4 beekeepers for an opinion, you get 5 opinions. The same probably is the case for financial advisors. I do have my concerns that we're treating each of these SANGs individually. And so, for example, we've got for these two, this one and the Percy Wakely, they've each got their endowment fund, CCLA fund, with an additional ring-fenced high-interest account to cover the short periods of time when the endowment fund might be short of money, point where we need it. To me, if we're running multiple SANGs and they don't all start on the same date, then I think that can, and the fact that one of the questions which I asked in that spotlight, which I think the officers did say that sounded possible, that these big expenses on this, the capital expenses, the ones every 25 years you have to resurface the car park, they're not mandated to be every 25 years. If that happens to fall on a very bad year for the investment, it could be postponed by a year or two when the fund is feeling better. So it may be we don't need this additional fund. That would take 10% off this cost straight away. And you get even more of that benefit if we're running multiple SANGs in parallel, because we don't need to say, oh, each of them have to have their own protection fund. Well, no, we're short on, this is a really important one this year. We can move money from there, from one to another, and then move it back again. So as a council, and we really don't know whether, we assume that the replacement council, once LGR happens, will have even more SANGs to worry about. They've got an even bigger swath of things they can do. So I'm not convinced completely on whether we need to do all of this investment. However, my impression from that spotlight, and again, officers might correct me if I'm wrong, is we're in this position, it's a bit of a historical anomaly, that the requirement to create these SANGs started a very long time ago in the first phase of Cranbrook. Is that roughly correct? And but it's taken us this long to get to this point.
Who wants to take that?
Chair, if it's all right to comment, but Ed, please jump in if I'm incorrect. This is a slightly specific situation because the early phases of Cranbrook were being delivered when our overall habitat regulations mitigation strategy was being developed. And so there was a discussion at the time about how much of the country park, which was already being delivered at Cranbrook, could be counted as SANG. And then that created this deficit of 14 hectares, which Cliffs Meadows and Percy Wakely Woods are looking to provide. And there is a Section 106, which provides some of the funding for that. But at that time, the costs of bringing forward a SANG weren't completely understood, and certainly not in relation to the in perpetuity management of that. And also, the availability of sites to provide the SANG was a challenge because lots of the land around Cranbrook and this part of East Devon is under option and wasn't available. So the site that we've developed for Cliffs Meadows wasn't the cheapest land we could have perhaps acquired had there not been other constraints. And it's also land that's in a floodplain, which has meant we've had to spend more money on delivering accessible paths. And there's a greater allowance for maintenance of that site because we've got to account for the wet site conditions. So there are some very specific circumstances here. Going forward into a more mature, I mentioned the SANG delivery strategy we're bringing forward. I think part of the way we would need to approach that in the future is we have a better understanding of the costs, but also when we're looking at sites, we can look to work with partners and other organisations and look at land that would be less expensive to deliver. So I think if I answer your question correctly, Councillor, this is a slightly specific set of circumstances which we would hope not to repeat. So, yeah.
Thank you. And the specific SIL money we're spending isn't SIL money that was collected for Cranbrook. It's stuff that's coming in now into our coffers.
Yes, Councillor.
Okay, so the other thing I'd like to touch on, which Councillor Burhop mentioned, is that there could be many places, many funds we could invest in. I find the argument that this is used by a number of councils for similar things quite persuasive. I mean, if we were just looking to make as much money as possible, we'd probably be investing in the US tech industry. Might be a big risk, but actually, do we want our money to be funding things that probably are not going to help the environment in East Devon? At least this money, while it's sitting there being invested, is doing some good within the UK, and I find that quite persuasive. It maybe is a bit more conservative as an investment than if we would just go for broke, let's have the maximum we can get. So I'm relatively content with that, especially if that's the advice we've had from our financial advisors and City Futures. So I guess where I'm coming down to now is that I think the other point that I wanted to make was that Councillor Olive made was that we're effectively closing off some other options because we've got this pot of SIL money and there are other things that has been mentioned we could also be spending on. This money, even if we didn't spend it, is way short of the 70 million we've been told we need to do. So by not doing this, we're not going to address very much of those outstanding things. And the fact that we did have a 10 million fund, which was a lot of it was allocated in the last rounds, says to me that we haven't actually, by considering this, we haven't closed off. We've done a lot of other things as well. So I can understand why you want to have a bit of freedom, and you might say, well, I'd like to leave our successor council the freedom to do whatever it wants in a bigger world, but we also want to leave East Devon residents with a resource that's there in perpetuity, or the definition in perpetuity, 80 years. And so that's why I think I'm still quite content with the decision that was taken by Cabinet to spend this money now in order to ensure this facility is there, or that this park is there for as long as we possibly can. I certainly take the argument, what at the end of 80 years? Well, yeah, I mean, but none of these solutions will do that. It was made obvious that it may well be within 80 years there's no SIL funding coming in, so just relying on SIL to keep paying the bills as we go, that might also give us trouble at that point. So I think, as with the others, I find this very difficult. It's a very difficult decision to make, and I really came into the committee this evening with an open mind. I could go either way. I can see arguments both for and against. I think I'm more persuaded now that if we leave the decision as it was made by Cabinet and we invest this money now, we've got the best chance of making sure that park is there for perpetuity. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Does anybody want to come back? And if not, I will try to sum up. Jeff.
Yeah, if I can just come back. Despite what my good wife would say, I'm a tidy person. Having our sangs all in this managed in the same way makes total sense. Having a mix and match is very untidy, I think, and passing the sangs over to a new unitary when now this one is managed this way, this one's managed that way, this one's managed another way. It's going to be complicated for the years to come. Also, now passing the sangs over to the unitary. Why should someone in North Devon paying into a SIL pay for a sangs in East Devon? We've collected the sangs for this area, and this is for this area. So those are other arguments of saying, no, we should be spending the SIL on our sangs now. So there's a lot of, no, I haven't fallen out with Councillor Olive. Now and it is very finely balanced, and he sees it from one way, and I see it from another. And I'll be happy either way. But on this occasion, on a very tight balance. Now we're always talking about balance in planning, aren't we? On very tight balance, I think what we've proposed is the best way forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And interesting when you talk about where the money would be spent. And I take the point that was said that actually the money you're potentially going to spend now, if it was agreed 1.1 million, wasn't SIL money from the area that's going to be spent on. So therefore, you could say that other areas are losing out because they might need some of this money. And I think that really is what, I know it's unusual, but Todd has persuaded me that, and I listened to him and I have gone through all of this, that actually his argument about, not about the value, but spending it in the right way for all the other things that are needed in this area. And do we want to put 1.1 million in? It says to me, there are so many things that need to be done. Is that the right way to do it? But let's be clear tonight, and again at Cabinet, there are different opinions of this. This is really difficult. And we have got two proposals, and we did add another one, refer it back to full council. I would just suggest that is the best place for this to be discussed at full council, because it's crucial decision. Here we are tonight, 5 of us are going to make the decision to either send back to full council or accept it or send it to Cabinet. Would it be better that more people, more members were able to see this? It's disappointing, but we were left in a situation we had to rebook the meeting. Otherwise, we may have had more on Thursday. But it's a very few number of people that are making that decision now. Paula.
I suspect if it went to full council, you'd have just a bigger split. I think it's going to be split whatever we do. So I'd like to propose that we stick to the plan and accept that we accept officer's recommendation, as has been done already.
And go on, Kevin.
I think what is absolutely clear is that we are split on this. We're uncertain. It was clear previously that council was also, cabinet was uncertain. For me, I think the sensible approach is to actually send it back to cabinet to reconsider it, because that's what we're supposed to be here to decide, is do we send it back or don't we? And that is not to say that we expect you to change the decision. We simply expect you to re-examine it, look at it in as much detail and more, and come up with a sort of final decision. So I think, given the uncertainty, given the number of assumptions that have to be made, for me, I think reference back to cabinet is what we should be doing.
Paula, you put a proposal that we accept it. Right. So then your proposal would be, if that's lost, then we go to the. That would be the substantive. This is right, isn't it? Yeah. I'll get it right. Your proposal is that it goes to cabinet, and I'm quite happy to second that, because I do think that's the right way to go. So, is there anything else before we go to the vote that either outside the cabinet or inside the cabinet they would like to say before we go to the vote? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. The extra money being put away into the high interest account, I'm assuming that can be called back. So if we discover in a year or 6 months, actually, that's not necessary, then that money is not lost to SIL. It could go back into the SIL pot at that point. I'm assuming that the money that, if we take out this CCLA investment, that 6.75% is the entry fee, that's lost. So even though presumably we or a successor council could decide, you know what, this isn't the way to go, we're going to have that money back, thank you very much, CCLA. You'll get it back with whatever investment income it's made to that point, but without that initial investment. So although we're, you know, if the council goes this way, it might be that with some fine tuning, we can take 10% off that cost by deciding that additional rider, which we've got on this and on the Percy Wakely Wood, may not be necessary if we manage things correctly.
But that's not up
But
for
that's not what
discussion
we're discussing
tonight,
here.
is
I'd just like
Yeah,
officers to really be, you know, to think of that for the future.
So, anything else? Simon?
it's worth just commenting on that. My view, but I'm happy to, well, obviously through the chair, others' views as well. Yes, that's within the council's gift, but I think it's a decision the council would have to make in that I think the decision is to make that investment for that particular purpose. Obviously, you'll monitor that investment, report back on it, but I think it would have to be then a decision of Cabinet to draw the money back for a different purpose, would be my take.
And yeah, Chair, I agree, and I think it would be sensible if we did decide to commit to the investment approach, we ring fence that money in the short term, but as you say, that money won't be lost, and it will gain a small amount of interest if we don't spend it. The key risk period is in the first few years when the investment's growing. After we get past that initial period, all other things being equal and the modelling being right, unless there is some significant event that impacts the investment, there should be enough there that you could then refund that money and use it for other things.
But I think what you're saying, you'd have to go back to Cabinet to do that. Yeah, yeah. Okay, anything else anybody wants to add before we go to the first substantial motion? So, all those in favour that we accept this as Cabinet endorsed this on the 3rd of December, show of hands, please. Those against? So it's carried, so therefore it will therefore go, it does not need to go back to Cabinet and it will stand as Cabinet agreed. Thank you very much, and I will bid you good night, just on time.